Trump election cleanup. U.S. strikes on Iran continue. China's Navy patrols Taiwan. And Rahul Gandhi detained. Greetings, humanity. Let's Grok the news. We cover the world's headlines, but first, a deep dive into the most important story in the world today. And as we get started, if you don't mind, please like, subscribe, or do those kind of things to make sure you always are around to Grok the news. Dateline, Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump's administration is intensifying efforts to strengthen U.S. election security ahead of the November midterms, with federal agencies pressing states for detailed voter roll data and threatening consequences for noncompliance. Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin sent letters to officials in at least 4 battleground states, citing what he called credible evidence of more than 250,000 non-citizens improperly registered to vote in just those 4 states. Mullin warned that states refusing to cooperate could face loss of federal funding and possible investigations. The moves follow a primetime address by the president in which he highlighted vulnerabilities in the nation's voting systems, particularly risks from foreign interference and outdated registration practices. Administration officials point to recent audits using federal databases that cross-reference voter information with immigration records. They say the goal is simple: ensure only eligible American citizens cast ballots. But Democrats in several states have pushed back sharply, calling the demands for transparency an overreach that threatens voter privacy and access. California Governor Gavin Newsom said that his state's elections remain secure and vowed to resist what he termed political interference. In Arizona, Tuesday's primary results showed strong performances by candidates backed by the president, including those who have questioned aspects of past election processes. These outcomes set the stage for competitive general election contests in a key swing state. Similar dynamics are playing out elsewhere as the administration works to reshape how elections are administered at the state level. Officials emphasize that the focus remains on verifiable citizenship and accurate rolls, not on restricting legitimate participation. Critics, including some election administrators, argue, well, the timeline is tight. Well, whose fault is that? And the requests will strain already limited resources so close to early voting in many places. The Election Assistance Commission has faced recent upheaval after the president removed remaining members, leaving the federal body that supports state efforts temporarily without full leadership. Supporters counter that these steps address long-standing gaps exposed in prior cycles, including incomplete data sharing between federal and state systems. Well, in this observer's opinion, these people will never do anything to fix the broken system that profits and empowers them. The push comes as public confidence in elections remains a concern for many, many Americans. In fact, upwards of 80%, and that's both Republicans and Democrats. Polling consistently shows divided views, however, on the integrity of the process, with Republicans more likely to express their doubts and Democrats more confident in the system, or at least in its outcomes. The White House says restoring trust requires transparency and verification, not complacency. Federal funding for election infrastructure, including cybersecurity upgrades, is now being tied more closely to compliance with these new guidelines. At the same time, the Justice Department has sent warnings to election officials about potential criminal liability if non-citizen ballots are counted. Finally, this has... Excuse me, folks. I have been asking for years for election officials to be held accountable for their crimes. This has heightened tensions in states with large illegal immigrant populations. What a surprise. Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, a Democrat, said that his office is reviewing the requests, but will prioritize state law and voter rights. Georgia officials have reported similar communications. The administration has declassified additional documents, it says, demonstrate patterns of foreign attempts to influence past votes, particularly from China. While some independent analysts question the scale, which, by the way, is 220 million American voters' private data hacked by China. Well, they don't care about that. But officials maintain the evidence does justify urgent action, at least right-thinking officials. As the midterms approach, both parties are mobilizing their legal teams and voter outreach operations. Turnout in the primaries has been steady, but the real test will come in November, when control of Congress hangs in the balance. President Trump has framed the entire initiative as a defense of American sovereignty at the ballot box. He has repeatedly said no nation can afford lax standards when adversaries are actively probing weaknesses. Vice President J.D. Vance has echoed that message on the campaign trail, urging states to act swiftly. With less than 4 months until Election Day, the coming weeks will determine whether these federal-state tensions produce stronger safeguards or deeper divisions. I'm Robert Gardner, using Grok each weekday to truthfully summarize the news. And as you heard, I interject my opinion. I don't mind doing it. We review a roundup of the most critical reports in the world right after this. God with Us, the story of Jesus, blends the Gospels into one inspired narrative. Divided into daily Bible studies, this book presents the story of Jesus from his birth to his ascension. Find God with Us by Robert Gardner. Oh, that's me. And you can find that at Amazon.com. Now, we grok the news with headlines from around the world. Dateline, London, England. British Prime Minister Andy Burnham, not elected by a vote of the people, by the way, chaired his first full cabinet meeting Tuesday, pledging a cost-of-living focus that begins with electricity bill relief through targeted tax adjustments. The new leader, who took office after Keir Starmer's resignation, aims to tackle slow economic growth and household pressures in a nation still recovering from recent political turbulence. This is recovering? Observers say early signals point to pragmatic governance over ideology as Burnham seeks cross-party support on key domestic issues. If this observer sounds dubious, it's because he is. Dateline, New Delhi, India. Opposition leaders, including Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, were detained by police Tuesday after staging a protest near Prime Minister Narendra Modi's residence, demanding accountability over the NEET, UG, exam controversy, and recent student demonstrations. The leaders were later released as nationwide attention turns to monsoon session parliamentary debates and calls for resignation in the education ministry. Dateline, Beijing. Chinese Coast Guard vessels conducted expanded patrols east of Taiwan this month, prompting joint concerns from the United States, Britain, France, and Germany over threats to regional stability and freedom of navigation. Beijing described the operations as routine law enforcement in its waters, while survey ships mapped sensitive seabed areas. Tensions remain high in the South China Sea, with additional incidents reported near Philippine positions. Dateline, Kiev, Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the country's top military commander, Oleksandr Syrsky, amid protests over defense leadership changes, naming a replacement to stabilize command. This reshuffle is yet another top commander in the oligarchy to fall. The reshuffle follows weeks of public unrest and comes as Russian forces continue their strikes on Ukrainian cities, keeping this also-preventable war's human and economic toll heavy. Dateline, Kabul, Afghanistan. Rescue team searched for survivors Tuesday after flash floods described as earthquake-like killed at least 23 people and destroyed homes and roads across multiple provinces. Heavy rains overwhelmed vulnerable areas still recovering from previous disasters, with officials warning more downpours could worsen the situation for displaced families. International aid groups mobilized emergency support. Dateline, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. President Donald Trump approved a long-term civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia that could open pathways for uranium enrichment under strict safeguards. The deal aims to bolster energy ties and regional stability while addressing proliferation risks through American oversight. Critics worry it sets a precedent amid ongoing Middle East volatility. Dateline Manila in the Philippines. The Philippines have raised a recent maritime confrontation issue near Ayungin Shoal at ASEAN foreign ministers' meetings, highlighting an injury to a Filipino sailor during a clash with Chinese vessels. Manila called for de-escalation and respect for international law, whatever that is, as South China Sea tensions persist despite diplomatic efforts. China's going to do what China's going to do. Dateline Tehran. The United States conducted its 11th consecutive night of strikes on Iranian military targets, focusing on infrastructure linked to drone and missile capabilities. President Trump warned of further action if Tehran fails to honor commitments, even as mediators from Pakistan and Qatar report incremental progress in separate talks. This observer will believe it when he observes it. Dateline Ottawa, Canada. Canada has canceled a planned joint infrastructure ceremony with the United States after President Trump announced 50% tariffs on most of Canadian goods, citing unfair trade practices. Officials in Ottawa expressed disappointment and prepared retaliatory measures against the United States, while businesses on both sides of the border assessed potential price impacts. Why does Canada want a trade war with the United States? This observer wonders, what the hell are they thinking? Dateline Paris. French lawmakers passed sweeping legislation banning social media access for children under 15, citing risks from harmful content and mental health effects. The measure, one of the strictest in Europe, requires parental consent and platform verification while allowing limited educational exceptions. Enforcement begins next year. As I've stated with similar such stories, this observer sees this as a two-edged sword, one that can certainly be used to protect children, and one that can certainly be used to protect the state. Dateline Caracas, Venezuela. National mourning continued for victims of recent earthquakes that raised the death toll now above 2,000, maybe above 2,500, with many, many, many thousands more still buried in the rubble. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez extended emergency measures, as search efforts persisted in hardest-hit regions. International assistance has been slow amid ongoing political and economic challenges. Dateline Jerusalem. Israeli forces maintained positions in southern Lebanon under a fragile ceasefire framework while constructing barriers that effectively divide parts of Gaza. Officials say the measures protect against militant threats, but humanitarian groups warn of long-term fragmentation for civilian populations. How about let's keep these civilian populations alive and not under militant rule? Dateline Islamabad, Pakistan. Authorities announced three-phase elections for the so-called Legislative Assembly in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, delayed from late July. The schedule extends into August amid security concerns and political maneuvering in the disputed territory. Dateline Mumbai, India. Heavy monsoon rains caused flooding and dam overflows in Maharashtra and other states, disrupting transport and daily life. Officials issued fresh alerts as rescue operations continued in affected northeastern districts where multiple deaths have already been confirmed. Dateline Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian Institution faced congressional criticism for exhibits critics say overemphasize themes of oppressors and oppressed, among other displays of perverse filth. No kidding. And rewritten history. House Republicans questioned leadership priorities during hearings on public funding and historical interpretation. How about restoring some balance there? Dateline New York, New York. Marxist Muslim Mayor Zohran Mamdani finally clarified that New York City actually lacks any authority to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on an international criminal court warrant, but he urged federal action nonetheless. The statement followed local debates over global accountability and President Trump slamming Mamdani pretty hard. By the way, America does not recognize the anti-Semitic International Criminal Court, which only seems to exist to bolster intifada. The United States does not enforce the dubious warrants of the ICC. Mamdani would if he could, as would others in the new socialism sweeping the Democratic Party. And that would be terrible news for U.S. citizens and for U.S. sovereignty. Dateline Jakarta, Indonesia. The government advanced 93 hydrogen ecosystem projects valued at more than $2 billion to support clean energy goals and to attract investment. Officials highlighted opportunities in production, storage, and export as part of broader climate commitments. Dateline Bangkok, Thailand. The cabinet confirmed August 12th as an annual national holiday honoring Queen Sirikit, the Queen Mother. The observance, already widely recognized, has received formal status to promote national unity and cultural heritage. Why, imagine that. A nation promoting its own cultural heritage. Seems like America could learn from this. Dateline Sydney, Australia. A Hyderabad cab driver, Rehman Pashat, a migrant from India who helped save lives during the deadly Bondi Beach Islamic terror attack a year ago, has now received permanent residency in recognition of his bravery. The case drew national attention to immigrant contributions, and there are some, during crises and fast-tracked citizenship pathways for this hero. And that's the difference between a legitimate migrant who wants to be a part of a civilization and an illegal invader sent to change it. Well, that's this observer's opinion, and I thank you for listening. Please join me tomorrow to once again Grok the News. I'm Robert Gardner. Godspeed and God bless.